officially welcome Zen to join us. Thank you so much. You've been very generous with your time. I know you got a lot going on, but this subject is especially interesting to our circle wide. So I'm really grateful for your time and your positive energy, and I'm going to let you take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, David. It's good to see some of you again and catch up and reconnect. And it's good to meet many of you who I haven't met before. My name is Zen Trenholm, and I'm the Senior Director of Employee Ownership, Cities, and Policy at the Democracy at Work Institute. We got started out of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives to expand worker ownership for communities that are locked out of good jobs and business ownership. So we do a lot of work with low-wage workforces, workers of color, and excluded workers. And we do that work in a number of different ways. We do a lot of train-the-trainers work. We do research on worker ownership and best practices, and we disseminate those best practices so that more co-op developers, more ecosystem organizers can have the tools and the resources and the knowledge they need to be able to make worker ownership a priority in their communities. I work with cities, right, and to make it more easier for communities to be able to adopt worker ownership as a tool, right, as a means to better jobs, local ownership, better working conditions in businesses. And so I've done a lot of work all around the country in partnership with community-based organizations, city governments, professional service providers, be able to figure out how they could best use the tool of worker ownership to move their goals forward. And so I'm excited today to share a little bit about the framework with which we use to both kind of just understand and talk about what is like a cooperative ecosystem and how we use that framework as a way to help us take action. And so I'm really hoping today to do a little bit of of an intro to the framework and how we use it, how we think about it. But I'm most interested in hearing, what are you working on? What questions do you have? What are some of the opportunities that you're interested in, and what are maybe some of the obstacles, the things you're missing that makes it challenging to support cooperative development? So with all that being said, let me share screen and we can get started. Okay, let's see. Okay, we're all seeing the title slide, right? Okay, right on. Okay. I've asked David to keep me on task here. So David,
I am
I've got
very good
you.
at that. But don't worry about
Great.
that, man. I got your back.
All right. Right on. I'm known to talk, so here we go. Okay. Let's see. All right. So I think many of you might have seen this framework already. Maybe some haven't been able to take a look at it. Democracy Work Institute and Project Equity, we work together to um, figure out how we can have something that can help us in a systematic way understand what helps worker cooperatives thrive and reach a scale that has impact. And to do that, we had to do a lot of research all around the world as well as around the country to kind of figure out like what was the secret ingredients, right? The secret sauce that made worker ownership really take root in places like Mondragon, Spain, or
Thank you. Really
Emilia-Romagna,
appreciate it,
Italy,
bud.
or Quebec, Canada.
Fine.
And so with in that research, we were able to come to conclusion that, well, every co-op ecosystem, if you look at it, includes both actors and elements. So those are the individuals, the organizations, the institutions that support worker ownership. And then there's the elements such as like the culture and the policies that interact to support or to inhibit the growth of worker cooperatives. And so we use this framework as a way to identify the resources and capacities that exist that you can leverage to build what's needed to achieve scale and impact, to kind of address the main obstacle to your work. And so before I get into the framework and what it looks like, I thought it'd be helpful just to share like just generally the big ideas here that I'm going to be covering throughout the conversation, and we can get into in the discussion. And that is that wherever you are, your ecosystem has some strengths and it has weaknesses. I don't care where you are in the country. I don't care where you are globally. Every place has some things that could be strengthened, some things already strong. The question is, how do you leverage what you have to work with to address the main challenge that you're facing right now that kind of gets you to the next thing. If your ecosystem is at an early stage, how do we build it up to the next stage? It's not all obstacles. There are too many obstacles, too many gaps. So it's about focusing on the ones that are the most critical that again take you to the next stage of your work. Um, One way we try to focus on this, and you'll see this in my next slide, is that we try to look at what do we need, especially in the early ecosystem, what do we need to build and organize around kind of the foundational building blocks that support worker ownership. And I'll get into what those are. And I think the final thing to note is that, and Dave wanted to make sure I mention this, is that there are a lot of resources in California. California is blessed with technical assistance, partners, policymakers, lenders, investors, people who really know worker ownership and how to support it, and who have made a lot of mistakes and had a lot of successes, and they're all around the state, and they can all support your work. And it's just a matter of connecting to the right people, so you're not alone. And so, as we get to know a little bit more about what you're trying to solve for, what you're trying to build in your communities, I'd love to make recommendations to who you can talk to next. Okay. Important just to go through like in terms of what co-ops need. I think it's important just to say, well, for any co-op to grow, to thrive, and obviously there needs to be more information and resources about it. That's a no-brainer, but it oftentimes it's a gap that we don't talk enough about. Not enough people are socialized in worker ownership, or that it exists in the first place. They don't know it, they don't ask for it. Don't ask for it, no one in the business service ecosystem will consider it a priority. And so they won't tell anyone about it. They won't sell their services to anyone about it. So then you have a vicious cycle. So information and resources is critical. That leads to more access to existing programs and services that can maybe be tweaked a little bit to support worker ownership, such as technical assistance around how to do things in a particular industry, particular strategies for developing co-ops, either as startups or as transitions from an existing business to an employee-owned company. And then financing, like the money that's needed to actually help start or grow the business, and it needs to be accessible. It needs to be able to work in the kind of the structure that is worker ownership, and so that's a challenge, but that's one that's increasingly being solved for. So these are the elements that make the ecosystem framework. At the bottom there, and these are the foundational ones I was talking about earlier, are the essential elements. When we look at skills and capacity, we're talking about are there worker owners that understand what it means to work in a worker co-op, that can provide peer-to-peer support to people who are just getting started, who know what the difference is between management and governance in a worker ownership context, who understand the difference between bylaws and operational policies and all of that, who know how to do the day-to-day stuff. It's that level of expertise that's there locally. That's the financing and funding. So that's with lending and that's with grants. Co-op developers, people who know from soup to nuts how to guide entrepreneurs and companies through developing the worker ownership culture and infrastructure. And then technical assistance is like your bookkeepers, your lawyers, right? Your accountants who understand how to measure things correctly, how to track things correctly, and help you set up your entity. And those are foundational. You need all of that because it's really hard to build something without knowing that it can work and having some of the key resources needed to support it. The important elements are, I like to think of as the accelerants. Business supports like industry associations. Connection to market is like procurement relationships. Policy and advocacy. So policy is at the city, county, or state level. It's the incentives, the subsidies, the resources, the grants that go to building some of those essential elements. Advocacy partners are movement-based organizations that are using the tool of worker ownership as part of their agenda for moving the needle on job quality for low-wage workers, for example, and are wanting to partner in making sure there's more policy or making sure there's more business supports and things like that. And environmental is more of the cultural elements. It's the things that continue to socialize that worker ownership is a normal part of the business landscape and is an important part to the business landscape and should be better supported and should be looked at as not this far left field idea, but actually something that is quite practical. It's pragmatic, and it actually delivers a lot of benefit. It has a multiplier effect on in terms of the impacts that it has on people's lives. And every ecosystem, right, will have some mix of these elements. The ecosystems you probably know of that you think about when you think about, oh, places where co-ops are successful, like maybe the Bay Area in California or New York City, for example, have a lot, basically the essential elements and maybe some, the environmental elements, but the important elements, they might be missing a few things. But generally, strong ecosystems that you can point at and go, wow, they've got a lot going on, all have pretty solid essential elements to build. San Francisco Bay Area, just as an example, um, I would, we have a whole tool that has like a scale from 0 to 5 to measure the strength of that element ecosystem. We can happy to share more and talk about that later. I'll just say here that we pass this through that rubric, and the Bay Area has been pretty weak on policy, but pretty strong, like I said, in the essential environmental elements. And now, in terms of growing their ecosystem, they're working on strengthening the connection to market, the policy piece, and more advocacy partnerships, particularly with organized labor unions and so on, because they know it's a missing accelerant that can take the ecosystem to the next level, make it more easy for workers who need resources to be able to get it from local governments that are putting out a lot of money for things around economic and workforce development that are trying to accomplish what worker ownership is uniquely positioned to accomplish. And so that's what they're working on now. I'll end with this and then open up for questions and conversation. And this is a really rudimentary breakdown, but I just wanted to be, simplistic with it so we can have conversation. So let's say an ecosystem that has some co-ops, but you want to see more of them. It's just kind of like San Francisco, right? There was a number of co-ops that got started in the 70s and 80s as a way for people to exit the Main Street economy and do their own thing based on their values. But now, increasingly, you see more workers trying to access worker ownership because they're tired of being exploited and they want to build businesses where they have control and say over their working conditions. Well, to make that and better support that, and these are, oftentimes folks that don't have a lot of capital, that have a really low risk tolerance for starting these businesses, but they need a better alternative to what they have. Well, then there are some things you can do around that. You can make it a priority in policy. Let's say, I don't, I know there are a mix of different organizations and that people are coming from today, but you might have some connection to resources, being that like technical assistance or funding that can go to support, training that's needed for worker ownership, technical assistance needed for worker ownership. There's obviously a need to build more partnerships, get more technical assistance providers to be able to support this work and train and equipped to be able to do it. Um, and let's say you don't have any co-ops. It's work. You think there's an opportunity to make worker ownership more of a thing in where you're working, but there's very few examples. You're still going to need partnerships, particularly with other experts who know how it works, but also with organizations that are trying to solve a problem in their community and are just maybe missing a tool in their toolkit that they can help them do that. And so you got to find organizations that are willing to it may be innovative, bring in a new tool, either be a developer themselves or be willing to, they have a community that they're working with that where they think workers should really benefit, then partnering them with other experts, other co-op development partners that can work with them to actually build that proof of concept project that shows that a worker cooperative is possible and meeting the concerns and needs of those partners that you've brought together. You're still going to need to connect to experts to continue to bring those resources down, but that's to be expected. And then the question continue to always be like, how do you find the more resources? It could be local, it could be statewide, it could be national, but you're going to need the capital, maybe some grant subsidies, professional service providers. But it's all about really the proof of concept to show that there is something that can work. And in the process of building that proof of concept, you've kind of exercised the muscles of that ecosystem to get used to supporting worker ownership. And now that creates kind of the new material conditions with which you can then use to develop the next set of co-ops. But you got to show that it's possible and that it can work. And that's maybe the distinction between the ecosystems that have some co-ops, where you already know it works, and places that don't have co-ops. So again, a simplistic and very quick review of things, but I'd love to get into the conversation with y'all.
Awesome. Great start. And you're amazing at graphics, obviously. So thanks for what you're doing. So I've got a ton of questions, but love part of our community is people coming on camera and asking questions rather than just a interview style conversation. So who's got the first question? If not, I'm happy to start the first one. All right. So yeah, there's a lot of great stuff there. I do have a lot of questions. One thing I was thinking about is, um, I'm familiar with a couple organizations that have done like training programs to seed people through co-ops and give them, if they've never run a business before, if they're not familiar with co-ops, is is that also a good starting point, or is it more that you need to really um, find the people who really would run the potential co-ops first? Like, how do you find a good starting point if you're just getting going?
Yeah, that's great. So we think about co-op development on a spectrum of what we call low touch to high touch support. Let's start with low touch. That's kind of what your small business development center does. It's about people who have an idea that come to you and they need just a little support to figure out how to do it right. Maybe support with their business model or with permits. The impact is diffuse. They may not go in and do anything. But maybe because it's a volumes thing, enough people come to you that with an idea, and maybe a small percentage of them actually do something. Now you're basically turning out, you're supporting the growth of entrepreneurs that have some resource, have some risks, some knowledge, some skills, and you're helping them kind of get started. That's kind of how we think about low touch. It's about referrals into the broader ecosystem. So you're connecting them with like, the bookkeeper, the business plan consultant, whatever it is. Okay. High touch is like incubation, where you take on the full cost of getting the business started. It's the risk taking, right? Of saying and you do this because you're really trying to develop a cooperative to support uh, to have an impact on a particular community that has low risk tolerance, low resources to be able to get something started, and are generally probably dealing with exploitation in their industry in their workplace. That maybe don't have access to the same opportunities that other folks do, and so it's a targeted community approach, and you take on the onus of making sure the business is successful. So you write the business model, you find the financing, you do the training internally. And then you build their capacity to then ultimately transfer ownership over to them as they hit certain milestones. It's a capacity building thing, and you're working with very few businesses, but you're having a really great impact with them. And so why I mentioned kind of how we think about co-op development there is that depending on what you're trying to accomplish, what problem are you trying to solve for using worker ownership? That kind of tells you what you maybe want to see happen in your ecosystem. If you're an organization that serves a particular community that you think could really benefit from worker ownership, you might be more thinking about the high touch side of things. And if that's the case, then yeah, training needs to be part of it, but that's maybe being trained on how to do co-op development yourselves or working with a co-op development partner that knows how to do that really well. If you're instead wanting to see many flowers bloom and maybe some flowers not blooming, but that's okay because it's about socializing the idea, then maybe what you do is refer out to other existing training programs. Maybe if you get a little bit of funding, right, you can obviously build that internally, but you also, if you want to just get up and running, the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops has a co-op clinic, for example, that's free for people to just get started, get access to support. You can refer out to co-op development organizations if the whole idea is that you just want more people to get access to what's there, and that's a low cost, and again potentially low impact way to just get the resources out very quickly. And so that's how I would think about it. Um, I don't think there's a wrong place to be. It's just a wrong place to start. I would say that it depends on what you're trying to accomplish, and then being very, very clear about what it's going to take to do that really well. And sometimes that's about doing it yourselves or partnering really intentionally to bring those resources in a really intense way. Other times it's more diffused and more about figuring out where those exist in your ecosystem or nationally.
Awesome. Igor, would you like to ask a question? And if you're able to come on camera, that's even better. So,
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much. And Apologies to have joined late, so you may have answered this in your presentation. From a policymaker's perspective, I'm on a city council. I'm wondering if there are any model ordinances that could be envisaged to improve the playing field and incentivize the formation of co-ops. And as part of this question too, I'm aware of many locally owned co-ops that treat their workers right. That's why they became co-ops in the first place. I am unfortunately aware of one where it bills itself as a co-op. It's a national co-op. We have a branch in Berkeley. It there is a dispute right now with its union, and so are there any kind of policy tools or mechanisms that could ensure that as jurisdictions incentivize the co-op model, that it includes high road
Mm,
standards for working people?
I love that question. So Igor, I lived in Berkeley for many years, and I remember you from my Berkeley days. So we never met, but I've seen your flyers. I've seen you around. It's glad to connect. Um, so in real brief, model ordinances, yeah, there's some stuff. I mean, and honestly, Berkeley has some of the model ordinance pieces because that's the thing. It's like um, the city of Berkeley has done a lot under the mayor, Jesse Arreguin at the time to really support business transitions to employee ownership. So there's a lot of really good stuff there. You have a revolving loan program, which has the Economic Development Administration has rubbers basically approved the unlocking of that loan fund to be able to for worker cooperatives to be able to access because previously they weren't able to because of a artificial limit on the number of owners that could apply for that funding. So that all being said, the question then becomes, what's next for Berkeley? What do you want to target? What do you want to solve for? And then we can find some examples around the country. They may not exist. That's just the reality of it. But there may be some examples that we can pull from that actually maybe gets at some new ideas. I'm really excited by things like the City of Chicago's community wealth building initiative that looked at partnering worker ownership with land trusts and housing cooperatives and community investment vehicles to think differently about local ownership and community ownership. Is it the model? Absolutely not. But is it an example of what can be done to think holistically about the needs? Yes. So you and I maybe can talk about that and see, given what you're looking at for your constituencies, how might what might be pointed out around the country to connect you to. It might be written, or it might be a conversation with someone. We can make sure that happens. The second thing I'll say is, I know the business you're talking about. They're a consumer cooperative and they're not even a great one at that. Um, they're different from a worker-owned business, right? Like they're consumer co-ops, so right um, there are different kinds of cooperatives, right? There are producer cooperatives where it's about it's pulling what you make as a farmer together to then market your products. Land O'Lakes butter, Ocean Spray, for example. So, there are consumer cooperatives where it's about how much you spend at that business that constitutes kind of the benefit, the profit, the surplus that you make. So you're incentivized, you're purchasing of that company's products to continue to be part of that process. With worker ownership, it's about the labor you put in. It's not about the money that you necessarily invest in the business. It's about the actual labor you put in the company. So already you're going to have a clear distinction around like um, what the form is being used to address. And so in the case of work ownership, it's being used to address poor working conditions, exploitative workplaces, low road standards. And so as we're thinking about high road standards, I think we can look at worker voice, worker control as the one way to do that. Not the only way, but worker ownership is a particularly powerful way of setting high road standards for different things. So if we're thinking about particular industry approach, be it like home care or healthcare, childcare, maybe that's if the city has some sort of relationship around in certain industries that you want to improve the working conditions in, maybe some of the high road language can be inclusive of worker ownership, and maybe could set some preference or some incentive around. But yeah, wonder if that answers your question, at least temporarily until we meet.
It does. Thank you so much, Zen.
Okay.
And with stay in touch. I sent my contact info
Oh,
over
thank
to
you
you.
very much.
Thank,
Wonderful. I'll
thank
write
you,
that down real
Brian.
quick.
Thanks for joining us. Ed.
Hi, thanks. Hi, Zen. Ed Braxton with the United Way here in Los Angeles. I have two questions, one related to data needs and one's related to communication. The first one is, um, are there particular, types of data needs that might be important for building that sort of proof of concept that you referred to earlier to show, how the co-op model can work that you might have seen other cooperative organizations, particularly in the early stage, uh, leverage to kind of make that case and story. And I ask because like we're funding two different organizations that are in the early stages of forming co-ops and just trying to understand how we can support data related needs or what those might be. And then secondly, just like general suggestions on tools for talking about and communicating cooperatives and cooperative work. I feel like a lot of the energy that goes into my work is just trying to communicate like what exactly folks are doing to people who might not be steeped in it in a way that's accessible in a way that makes sense, while still kind of retaining like the essence of that work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, those are great questions. And they're interrelated. I mean, right? They're perfectly matched. It's like, how do we make the case? How do we tell the story? And in some ways, we're going to need data to do that. But we're also going to need to speak to the audience that we're trying to bring into the work. And certain things will resonate with different audiences. I, I I do work with cities around the country, and some of the cities don't look too kindly on things that have cooperative in the name. But they are really interested in strong local businesses, and they do want better working conditions. It's not like they wouldn't be unhappy with that, but they want strong businesses. They want local businesses. So we talk about it that way. We pointed to data, right, that shows better job retention, which means a lot less overhead and money going, basically being spent and then being lost because you got to then retrain people. We look at it from a like when an economic downturn standpoint, how many businesses were able to stay afloat as a worker-owned business versus a traditional business. We have data that shows that worker-owned businesses are more resilient. And so, we make the case in a way that speaks to the priorities of who we're talking to, you know. And so to answer specifically, DAWI and the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, we do a biannual census of worker cooperatives where we understand who are they, where are they, in terms of averages, like what's the wages, what industries are they in, what's the demographics, to just show that um, that there's growth. Well, I'll say this: to understand if there's growth, to understand who's being served, to understand if businesses are staying small or growing, or where are we at with it. Some of that we can share very publicly, because we do it in aggregate. Some of it is privacy related. We have to keep that internally, but it always informs how we do our work. And so there's data that we can share that's just like helpful in saying, here's the impact. And then closer to home, there's a ton of great data in California, ton of great data that we can point to in different ways. So there's a state program called the California Social Entrepreneurship for Economic Development, California Seed. That worked with a lot of work. It helped fund workers' centers and community-based organizations to better serve excluded workers to be able to access work using worker ownership. So it was about working with folks that can't get employment, be able to form worker cooperatives. And we have really great data to show what a worker-owned co-op was able to do for those workers in the same industry. Car wash, home care, taxi, and I think cleaning or childcare. I think these are really low wage industries with a lot of particularly women of color that work in them, and will show the impact in terms of the wages increase, the ability to take sick time, all this stuff. And I think while that's like a particular case study of a one program, it's illustrative of what's possible when workers own their own business. It shows the ceiling of what's possible, not just raising the floor, but also raising the ceiling of what's possible when workers own their thing. So we could provide that data as well. And a lot of those organizations, I should mention, are based in Los Angeles. So there's a Los Angeles story there that's related to the state program that I think could be useful to some of your work. I think we could use more data. I think we don't have nearly enough of it. I'm thinking about economic data, like the multiplier effect of $1 spent at a worker-owned business or $1 made at a worker-owned business. And because of its worker ownership status, like how long does that dollar circulate in the local economy? I want to see more of that. We don't have that data. So we can't necessarily get a purely economically biased person to be like, why should I invest in this thing? Because we don't have that. But we speak about it in different ways. So depending on the thing you want to argue or the where you think the audience that you're talking to will really need to understand the impact or why they should care about it, we can probably provide you with the data to help do that. But we might be missing a few things, just as a caveat. Same with communications pieces. It totally depends on what you're trying to communicate and how. So if you want to follow up and talk more about who we're trying to convince and bring into this work, there's some stuff that we can share that I think does a pretty good job of speaking to different audiences. We've had to write a number of different things for movement orgs, for cities, for states, for lenders. It kind of depends on who you're targeting. We have some stuff that we'd be happy to share, and not just us, but from the broader work ownership field that could be useful.
Awesome. Thank you, Zen. I've got some follow-up questions to that, but I'm going to let Didicus go first. You're on mute, sir. I'm gonna jump ahead of you if you don't come off mute.
No, I'm up. All right. So there's several cooperatives in the Bay Area where I'm at that are up and running, have been up and running for several decades. I'm thinking of there's a baker's cooperative in Oakland. There's a cheese cooperative in Berkeley. There's also several markets. Grocery stores, like a famous one in San Francisco. You guys can look them up. They're not hard to find. All of them are selling something. As you know, the Mondragon are mostly manufacturing cooperatives as opposed to retail and commercial. So they employ a lot more people and a lot more what you call deeper employment. I'm an urban planner by trade and economic development specialist. And I'm also part of the public bank. This is something that the Public Bank East Bay is very much interested in putting in our portfolio, that we finance cooperatives. But I'm more interested in the industrial aspects of it. The other ones, they can start small and they can expand as people join them. In the Mondragon, usually you pay like $10,000 and you have a year to pay it out. And then you're a member. Sometimes there's a longer period, like 2 years, that you have to do an internship so that you really understand what you're getting involved with. Then you pay your $10,000. Then you become a voting member and a participating member of a cooperative. So what I'm asking you is, is there a formula or a source for an industrial base that you know of or can think of or point us in?
When you say source, is it like, are you looking for examples of strong cooperatives that have, they basically work in manufacturing or something like, again, heavy industry? That's the question.
All those aspects, but yes, of course, that too.
Okay. So there are. We find that worker ownership works best in labor-intensive industries, and that often means and in industries that's like values-oriented, as well as in industries where the quality of care is really matters. So, for example, the care industries is just an obvious one. If you care about your job, and it's more than a job. You're going to treat your clients better. You'll have more of that capacity yourself to be able to feel like you're you can go to work happy and with meaning and all that. So that has a huge impact, and we can talk about all that. For the other things that we talked about, the values-based industries and the labor-intensive industries, they kind of get to your question here. There are examples in the solar manufacturing world. There's solar manufacturing and install. It's still kind of like it's a business to consumer kind of a framework to it, but there's an industry strategy that's large and getting big and has going back to the ecosystem framework. It has a strong business support infrastructure that works to create economies of scale for like bulk purchasing of solar panels, for example, to be able to then sell and install in certain places. So solar, there's a big piece there. There are other industries too, but it depends on what I guess how do I put this? It was where we see industry strategies really take root in places are in places where the industry has really been part of like the heritage and of the importance of the economic workforce development of the policy space. So like an example is industrial commons in Western North Carolina, clothing and clothing production and cut and sew, textile manufacturing. All of textile manufacturing has been a long heritage industry in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
It basically near disappeared with NAFTA, and but there's still firms that continue to do that work, and they're mostly staffed by Central American immigrants, and these are really shitty jobs where people are really being taken advantage of. Well, it was an organizing strategy to improve those jobs, and so a worker cooperative was formed, but they didn't just stop there. They decided that they needed to do a better job of improving conditions across the kind of the vertical supply chain, from the production of the cotton itself all the way to the cut and sew factories, and then the distribution of that. They have an industry strategy. And so many different organizations and partners in ag and in factories and in certain shops that come together to basically figure out how they could better work together as a whole to be able to produce better products more cost efficiently and for better profit. And so that's one particular industry that's like well rooted in the state of North Carolina, that's well supported. That I don't care who you are, what politics you have, you want to invest in a strong industry there because it helps with rural jobs and all of that. That's what their approach was. There are other examples we can get into, but there are many manufacturing and I would say high-tech manufacturing worker co-ops as well that we can always point to. I think maybe the larger question is like, how do we make this work in the Bay Area, for example? And it's a really big question. Honestly, I would say Arizmendi is your closest bet at an organization. So they're the bakeries, right? The bakeries in the Bay Area. What I love about their approach is that they're systematic at understanding the industry. They know what it costs to produce a loaf of bread and how much it costs to build to get the capital for it. They only locate in places that make sense to the market. I mean, they are very, very good at building their business model and replicating what's successful in a region. There's a lot to be learned about how they think about industry. I think we could use more industrial and like manufacturing and like deeper employment, like you used approaches. We ourselves are engaged in a home care initiative in California that spans across the state because we think we need more economies of scale to be able to serve more workers in shifting over to worker-owned home care. But to do that is a heavy lift. But there are others around the country that are thinking kind of along your lines. But I would say start with maybe a conversation with Arizmendi's support cooperative to just get a sense of how they thought about their approach. Because they didn't just stop with bakery too. They also looked at ADU building, and I think they might have taken a step back from building ADUs. But that was their thinking about how do we take what we know works in one industry and apply it to another. And it might be a good place to have a conversation.
Okay, that's thank you. That's great resources. Because what I was intending to do is work with waste to resource recycling plastic. As you know, 95% of recycled plastic ends up in the landfill or in the ocean. So there's several companies, some Canadians, some on the East Coast of the United States that manufacture building blocks. They're more cool. Lego type building blocks. So I wanted to go from waste resources in the neighborhood to a manufacturing facility, turning them into building blocks, and then to a developer, a co-op developer, to erect buildings in the neighborhood using such materials.
That's interesting. Recology, right?
Yeah.
The main, right? Okay. In San Francisco, right? They started out as a worker cooperative. I don't know if you know that. They're a
Yes, I'm
worker
very much
cooperative.
aware. I
Yeah, a
knew them
series of
when they
worker
were
co-ops.
as such.
Oh yeah. Okay. All right. Then you get well. They're always thinking creatively about different revenue streams, and they might be a fast partner there. I don't know if I have other examples, but I bet they could exist. I just nothing none come to mind. But if anything, I would consider them potentially a thought partner in that, and potentially a business partner in that.
I'll look them up again.
So we've got Zen for about 10, 15 more minutes. Who has yet to ask a question, has one that they'd like to throw up? Throw in, not throw up. Don't throw up. Whatever you do, don't throw up. Chucho, good to see you.
Thank you, David. Thank you all for sharing time, space, and solidarity. Well, one of the things that I was wondering, it's because we're here in the Central Valley and we're trying to initiate a farmer co-op, but specifically it's underserved, historically underserved BIPOC farmers. And so the idea is that co-ops is not that big out here, as much people would think, right? But there is a big interest in it. We would like to develop more procurement in terms of access to resources, information models. I mean, we're working with, and I mean, we as a community, we're as immigrant, myself being an immigrant, landing into this country at the age of 15. Um, it was we've worked the fields, we've worked in different things, cleaning houses, cleaning windows and stuff, and uh, mechanics and all that stuff. So the idea is that business owners who do landscaping or house cleaning businesses, uh, they would like to engage these structures, but the reputation or the information they have access to is that it's not good. And there's a lot of envy, blah, 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 misinformation and stuff like that. But in Spanish speaking, and I'm specifically talking about the Mexican communities, Mexican immigrant communities here in the Central Valley, we're 99.9% of the immigrant population here. And the idea is that our Spanish-speaking media does not share these kinds of alternatives, whether it's in the TV, whether it's in the radio, and there's a little engagement. I know there's a conference of co-ops here, but the tickets for that engagement is about $800, and so that's it's too much for people like us, no? But the idea is that how would we be able to harness? I mean, at least I would be interested in getting some kind of conference in the Central Valley of co-op development. And so it's just getting folks in different languages. Here in the Fresno area, we have 28 different languages. So it's, yeah, but
Extremely,
the
yeah.
idea, and thank you, Stacy, for sharing that social entrepreneurship link. Definitely want to see. We right now submitted a proposal for a 12-acre land access out in the Ridley area, and we would like to see how we would be able to uh, propose more, if I don't know, a stronger proposal, I guess, for this family who's interested to be in solidarity with co-op farmers out in the Ridley area.
Hmm.
Thank you.
Zen,
Thank you,
isn't there
Chucho.
a co-op conference coming up in the Central Valley later this year?
The co-op conference that I know about is it's happening in UC Davis, but yeah, that's
Yeah.
yeah, and that's not the one that cost 800. Yeah, that one I think is about 300 and something.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I'll say that that's the California Center for Co-op Development's annual conference. That's the one in UC Davis. Last year was in San Diego. They do move around. There could be there could be an opportunity to do something in Fresno. I think worker ownership is critical in Fresno. I've had some conversations with some organizations out there trying to do some work. Maybe it's your organization, I don't know, but like years ago. But I know it's also can be a really challenging ecosystem to be doing work in. I will say that while there might be misinformation, maybe lack information, at least, and again, I don't want to talk from a place of not knowing, but we use like popular education format when we think about co-ops, right? Like especially immigrants from like Central America, not like have a lot of experience with communal communal living, communal organizing, communal business and services. And so we when we think about co-op development, like yeah, okay, it's a business, it has this entity, okay, whatever. What is it? What are we really building around? And it's building around what people know how to do and what they've seen really work. So we always try to start from there, and we just add to it with like, cool, that's the way to do it. Let's formalize it in this particular document that is needed to make sure you've got the business entity all set up. But anyways, I just think there's a lot that can be built on from what people already know, and we try to add to it or speak, bring that truth into the conversation. You asked a lot about potential resources, BIPOC farmers. I think this is very, very cool. I don't know if you know My Win. She is a farmer herself. She's a co-op developer too. She's associated. She's in California and awesome. I'm just gonna pull up her. I'll just put in the chat right now. My Win. I'll just write her name. She's Vietnamese American, and she might be a good person to talk to, particularly about the intersection between worker ownership and like BIPOC, like farming. She's someone to talk to. She'd be the one. She'd be the person I would very much be strongly thinking about. The procurement thing you asked about, that's a tough one. I don't think we're good enough yet. We don't have enough skill set or expertise on to really do a better job with that. We're trying to get better at procurement. It's a tough nut to crack. We're trying to crack it at a local government level or a government level. We're trying to crack that at a private level. There are more opportunities at the private corporation level than I would say at the public government level. But we're working on both lanes. I think it's something to talk about. But if you produce something that's really good quality, there's a way to market it and get into the hands of and get someone to care enough to buy it. It's just a matter of brokering the relationship. And we can talk about what that looks like. I'm always happy to chat about that. I really hope you can go to that conference at UC Davis. And I think you should get a scholarship to go. And I think we can make sure that introduction happens because we need to see more folks in Central Valley with the support they need to do this work. So
they're usually very generous with scholarships. So you should check on that, Chukul, because I've heard of that, people going there and telling me about it.
Exactly. Oh, and the final thing I'll say, and then I'm sorry, I'll jump to Stacy here. There is an organization that does work with many. It's kind of a similar community, not where you are, but on in the Salinas Valley. Their name is Ventures. They used to be called Santa Cruz Community Ventures. They're just Ventures now. They have a multiple industry approach to like supporting cooperative development, but they're working with, again, predominantly like Mexican immigrants. A lot of them either working on farms or generally are in farming communities in the valley.
Michoacanos.
Is that right specifically? Okay.
The Salinas Valley, I was surprised. It's almost exclusively.
I had no idea. Oh, interesting. Well, they would be a really good organization to talk to. They have many staff that work in co-op development and do training there, and they're very sophisticated in how they think about who they work with, and at institutional levels and industry levels. I just think they're a really good connection. And I think they'd be more than happy to talk to you. If you need an intro, shoot me an email.
I'm also looking at having them come and present to our soon. Yeah.
Perfect. There'd be a great organization to talk to.
Yeah. Stacy, good to see you. Go ahead. You're going to ask the last question. So.
All right. I'll try to be really quick. Chucho, just a quick comment for you. I'm trying to develop all of the things related to my chef owner co-op, also in Spanish. So if you would like to connect, I would actually love to have another pair of eyes on that. I think a lot of it could be relevant to what you're doing too. But my question is about resources related to the intersection between cooperative development and community investment, and especially for like startup expenses, that kind of investment, not necessarily real estate or something like that. I'm doing kind of high touch for this chef owner cooperative, but I'm kind of tapped out and I'm looking to raise small investments from community members. And I'm looking for a good model for that.
Mm.
Uh,
Where
uh,
are you based?
Santa Barbara.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, a couple thoughts. I think it's a really great question, and there's been some innovation that could be helpful. Um, First off, I don't know if you're familiar, if you've all talked about seed commons. They come out of the working world. Have you looked at seed commons? Has there been, well, is there like an obstacle there about maybe seeking some funding from them?
I haven't, so my goal specifically is to raise really local money and particularly with clients
Okay,
of business.
okay,
So
good to
I'm
know.
doing that, yeah.
Okay, then the other thing I'll say, and again, I'll just put a caveat. I'm not a finance expert. I think there's some folks you can talk to that can maybe think through some options, and I'll have to maybe ask around my organization and see who might be good about this. So let me preface it with a lot of caveat. I think I gotta ask some questions, but so let's follow up. You can send me an email. I will say this one thing though. Equal Exchange, the coffee and chocolate company, they also wanted to raise money, not necessarily locally, but the same principle. They wanted investors, uh, not loan, not loans. They wanted investors, and they wanted those investors to not have an ownership stake or like a what is it called? Class A share of the business. Uh, so they needed to figure out a way to create that. So they did, and they were able to do like a direct public offering that actually did get investors involved from the community and maybe honestly, I do think from some of their clients or some of the people in the supply chain who had also invested in them. There's a little part of my brain that somehow remembers that. I could be completely wrong. So again, heavy dose of caveat. But they developed this model that I think has been used by several cooperatives around the country to raise capital, equity, basically, to support this work. Um, there's also another little funny thing, which I don't know it works in your situation because it sounds like you still want to be a part of this. And I don't know how you're structured, but there's a program called the State Small Business Credit Initiative, mouthful, SSBCI. It's multi-billion dollar capital program that Treasury Department a few years ago authorized to basically address capital needs um, in markets all around the country, in all states, territories, you name it. It goes to state governments, and then they get that money gets put out to through their capital programs, and states have their own networks of banks that they work with to do this. California has these programs. Why I mentioned is that Congress authorized this program and said make it work for employee ownership, which is totally wild. Treasury had no idea how to do that. We worked with them, other people worked with them. You could use those dollars, federally speaking, in terms of guidance, you could use those dollars to help finance the transition of a business to employee ownership to actually like share basically pay for the cost of creating an employee owned business. And that's a particular exclusion to the general rule, which is like you can't use that money to add more equity to your stake, whatever. But it is useful for employee ownership. I don't know if that works in your case, but I did want to mention it because it is another example of potentially equity and type investments that could be used to actually create employee ownership. And it's about taking a going concern and making sure that it transitions to more owners who are part of that. So again, I know it's a little different when you're talking about you're kind of more talking about like a direct public offering almost approach or community driven investments, and so that might be a little slightly different. But I wanted to mention in case it was something you're interested in. But if you send me an email, maybe with your question, I could see if there are organizations that we know of that would be better to talk to explore your options.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, I'm interested in both equity and debt as options. I think just getting some advice about what makes the most sense given this particular.
Okay.
So, yeah,
Okay.
thanks.
So
Yeah.
Zen, let's just say that someone who's watching this video later on, which, of the thousands of people who will be watching, wants to interact with you or Democracy at Work Institute, what would be the best way for, what sort of services does Democracy at Work Institute offer that people would reach out to you versus some of the other
Mm.
organizations that you've mentioned? And then before you answer, just going to ask everybody to think about a question before he answers, which is I want to start figuring out how to put Easter eggs at the end of these videos to see who actually watches the videos online to the end. So I'm going to see who's got a great idea for that. But I think that could be fun. It doesn't have to be something serious. It can be something totally wacky. Or maybe we could just have a little dance party. Zen, I'll let you go on time, but wanted to hear your answer. And then just, of course, we all want to thank you so much for your time. So
Grateful to be here, and thank you for your questions, your interest in building cooperatives and building cooperative ecosystems. If you want a thought partner on how to particularly work with city government or county governments or whatever to support worker ownership, you reach out to me. Let's have a conversation about that. You can also reach out to a Democracy Work Institute to get more access to understand what data is out there. How we use that data to make the case for worker ownership. You can reach out to U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives to just know what are the worker co-ops out there, what industries, what free training can we get for the workers or entrepreneurs that we're working with. They have a ton of resources. If you want to do policy advocacy, that's at the state level. Reach out to Dowie. Let's reach out to the Federation. Let's talk. In terms of co-op development partnership, we have a specific program that's focused on working with worker centers and community-based organizations to develop worker cooperatives for excluded workers. You want to know more about that work and how we do that? Reach out to Dowie. And secondly, if you are doing projects that are about transitioning longstanding businesses to worker ownership by helping retiring owners sell to their employees, and want to know who does that work, how do we finance it, how do we support it, what does it take to do it? Reach out to us. We've got some resources, and we facilitate a national network of technical assistance providers that specialize on business transitions work, and there are a ton in California you can connect with. So we may not be the right place for every question, but we can certainly find you organizations to connect with to answer your questions and get the support you need.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I did forget one other thing, which is I would love for people to share the video, to come up with other ideas about things that they'd like to learn about this year. So if you've got something else specifically you want to learn about co-ops or something else about a well-being economy, we're interested to hear about it. Zen, also welcome your ideas. But we're doing this all for free, and all we ask is that you bring another person in so we can grow the movement and to sort of coin use Zen's term, socialize these ideas and get it out there. So thank you everyone to coming, and especially to Zen for answering all our questions. Really appreciate it.
Bravo. Thank you, Zen.
All. Yeah, I appreciate you all. Take care, and let's be in touch.
All right. Thank you.